Welcome, I'm Walter Drew, member of the Education Committee. In the back on the P's and Q's, we have Jim Sweetwood. Today's presentation is brought to you by the RVAR's Education Committee. This is a hybrid class with about 25 folks here at the RVAR office, and the rest are attending via Zoom. Laura Benjamin is joining us from her office so that she can monitor those joining us via Zoom and pass along any questions that they have. For those of you in the room, the microphones installed in the ceiling are sensitive and can pick up noise in the room. So please refrain from talking during the presentations. And that's going to be a challenge for me. Please mute your mobile devices. For those on Zoom, please remain muted until a time when you might want to pose a question, or if you are attending via Zoom, you can always put your questions in the chat as well. There will be times during the presentation where we will ask for questions, and those of you on Zoom, you can either type something in the chat, which Laura is monitoring, or unmute yourself to ask a question, and we will also recognize those in the room for questions. We are recording today's class and will make the recording available for at least a 30-day period. We will be sending a survey to the attendees for today's class. Not only do we want your input on today's class, but we will be seeking thoughts on future classes as well. We will be sending a survey to the, I just read that. Before we get started, let me mention several upcoming RVAR offerings. Tuesday, April 4th, RVAR will offer an economic update featuring VAR Chief Economist Ryan Price. For those of you who have never heard Ryan in person, I mean, the guy is full of information and really does a great job of breaking it down for us. Our next class for the RVAR Education Committee is Wednesday, April 12th. That is on manufactured or modular housing. CRS tax is also one of the features in our MLS system. They are offering two classes on Friday, April 14th. The first class will focus on the basics of using CRS tax, and the second class will demonstrate how to use CRS tax for prospecting and to create a CMA. One more April class will be held on Tuesday, April 25th, focused on setting expectations for sellers. Curtis Burchett will explain how he sets the list price in today's market. And then we will also have Mac Westland showing how he uses MLS statistics and graphs to educate sellers on the market that we are currently in. All of these sessions can be attended in person or via Zoom. You can register online, or for those of you attending in person, you can register this morning before you leave. The sheets are in the back. And now for today's class. Our presenters are from Virginia Title Center. And let me introduce Patti Dickerson. Patti is the Director of Operations and Marketing for Virginia Title Center. She enjoys giving back to the banking and real estate industries. Patti is currently the Vice Chair of RVAR's Program and Special Events Committee, and she also serves on the Board of Directors of the Roanoke Regional Home Builders. Patti, please come on up. Thank you for being here with us this morning. We really appreciate your time. Patti has also been a real estate agent in the past as well and involved in banking. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Well, thank you for your time.
A pretty diverse background in marketing in different ways. I was actually a relocation director for Boone & Company Long and Foster many moons ago, and then into banking. So I've kind of been on various sides of the business. So thank you for having us. Thank you, Beth, for inviting Virginia Title Center to share our knowledge of the settlement process. We are very excited to be here. And let me see if I can. Got it. I need to go out. Trying to figure out, Jim.
Sure.
It's not that easy. I've minimized everything, so I wouldn't be up there. Okay, here we go. And I gotta figure out how to. Bear with me here. All right. And you can get. Okay, cool. So with me today, I brought some of our wonderful experts. First, got Angie Smith. Angie's been in the field of real estate for at least 21 years. She started her career in an attorney's office in Rocky Mount, and then she transitioned to managing a settlement company in Roanoke until she and her sister Dawn opened Legacy Settlement Services in Rocky Mount in 2011. In January of 2019, Virginia Title Center was thrilled that Angie had enough of managing a business and wanted to focus on what she does best, which is thriving in the chaos of the settlement process. So she joined us as a settlement processor, and she's really assisted us in growing our market in Southside. She helped us establish a satellite office in Rocky Mount. And she works in the Southside area all the way from Franklin County down to the North Carolina border. She lives in Snow Creek with her husband and 3 very active kids, and in her spare time enjoys traveling and making memories with her family. Dawn Finney, her sister, is a veteran of the financial services and real estate industries. Dawn worked in the mortgage servicing division with First Union Wachovia for 10 years before transitioning to other banking roles within Wachovia. These experiences led her to a financial planning career for 5 years before Angie convinced her to get into the title and settlement business. Soon after, they opened up their business. And with the advent of TRID back in 2018, for some of those who in the room that have been in the business for a while, know things changed a bit. Legacy began processing cash transactions only, and we had the good fortune that Legacy partnered with Virginia Title Center to handle all of their clients' needs, full service with title and settlement. By the end of 2020, Dawn was enjoying the flexibility that the schedule provided, and she decided to wind down Legacy and strictly offer mobile closing services and title support to Virginia Title Center. So we were very fortunate to have her, some on the front end and mostly on the tail end of a transaction and doing our closings for us. While her roots are in Franklin County, Dawn and her husband and dog Marley currently reside in southern Roanoke County. In her spare time, they love traveling all over in their RV. In fact, she takes about 6 weeks off in January, February, and heads south and roams. And they have a fabulous time. So very pleased that they are here to share with us today. Let's see what you can expect today. We're going to cover the ins and outs of the settlement process, what to expect on closing day, tips for a smooth closing, reading the closing disclosure or the HUD-1, the importance of title insurance and the dangers of wire fraud and how to prevent it. For those on Zoom, we will have on each slide in the lower left-hand corner will be the documents that have been sent to you that will be associated to those particular slides we're talking about. For those in the room, you have a copy of each of those in your packet. I believe it starts on the left side of the folder and will move to the right side as we go through the presentation. So at this time, Angie, I think you're on deck.
Thank you, Patty. Okay, so where we start is basically when you guys send us the contract. We have an admin team at Virginia Title Center that's made up of 4 or 5 people. So you guys would send us the contract and it comes into our closings email. If for some reason it comes to one of us, we send it to them. They open up. That's when it all starts. That's when we open up the file and we order the title search. Oh, sorry, forgot about that part. Okay, send that to us ASAP. Sorry. the quicker we get it, the quicker everything's gonna start going, the quicker we're gonna get that title search back and things are gonna start moving. So once we get that, they open it, like I said, we get a title search ordered, and then they assign it to a processor. And there is a process in that. We all work with certain realtors, certain areas. So if you work with someone, that's probably who your contract's going to go to. So it gets assigned to us from there. Let's see. We've already did that. So after the processor gets the file, after we know we got your contract and we get your file, we send out letters to, a lot of times first we send them to you guys, to the realtor, to let you know who has your contract, who's going to be your point of contact here at Virginia Title Center. We send the forms, the seller agent transaction form and the listing agent transaction form to you. These forms are great for us. It gives us all the information that we need, contact information for your buyer, your seller. It also tells us the commission, because that's not in the contract. So we don't know that unless it's somewhere in the contract. So we ask for that. It has all the details, the sellers, if they're married, if this is going in an LLC, if your seller is going to be, or buyer is going to be a mail-away. Those are things that are pertinent and good for us to know up front. And a few other things that is very helpful, that helps us in process and to know up front, is if there's a power of attorney that's going to have to be used if your seller isn't here, or if your seller is, in a nursing home and there's a power of attorney. Those are things that's kind of nice to know ahead of time, because we do have to have that. Just yesterday, this came up, so I made a note, bankruptcy. If your seller is in bankruptcy, if it's in an active bankruptcy, we definitely need to know that, because we can't sell the property unless it's got to be a court order and all of that. So those are things we are nice to know up front when we're going forward. Anybody have any questions on that part so far? Good. Okay, so after we get this back, or if we have the information from the contract, we send out welcome letters to your buyer and to your seller, letting them know that we're their point of contact. The buyer's welcome letter basically just says that we are their point of contact. We ask for their names, how they want on the deed, if they have a middle initial, if they're married, those kinds of things we need to know up front. It also asks where they're going to get their homeowner's insurance. The sellers, we usually send the seller's information sheet with an authorization, because if they have a payoff, we normally have to send an authorization to the lender to get the payoff. So those are just things we do up front while we wait for the title search to come back. Any questions? Okay. So when the title search comes back, the admin team gets that and they put it in our folder and they assign it to an underwriter, who then reviews the title search that came back, and they prepare the commitment. After they prepare the commitment, they let the processor that's assigned to the file know. And that's where we start working with the lender, if there is one. If it's a cash deal, we kind of go through what's needed. We send, if there is a lender involved. Let me see this one. I'm not keeping up, I'm sorry. They prepare that. All right, so we review it. If there's a lender involved, we send preliminary documents. We send the title commitment to the lender, all wire and instructions, a prelim settlement statement, CD with all of our fees, recording fees to the lender at that time. And we also will send the buyer a copy of that title commitment as well, just so they can see what's on it at that time. Okay, so after that, while we're waiting, if there's a lender, there's time, because we're done with that part, but we have to wait for the lender to get ready to close. During that time is when we are trying to clear any kind of title issues, of course, get payoffs if there's payoffs. Some issues that come up that takes time. on the title or unreleased deeds of trust, which I'm sure you've all have ran across that. Those are not always easy to find and get released, especially if it's a bank that's closed or an individual that had a deed of trust on the property and they're dead, so those takes times. Judgments, whether it's the seller that has a judgment or a previous owner that had a judgment that could have been missed. And then also, tracking down heirs, if this was an estate, nothing's been filed. Those are all things that we're working on in the meantime that could come up that can take some time to clear. Of course, we order the payoffs, order the deed if we're handling the seller side. Y'all have any questions so far? Any of that?
If you had something that was an estate, you say you're looking for things, are you looking for a copy of the will? Are you looking for whether it went through probate or not?
Yeah.
Things like that?
When the title work comes back, if it was an estate, what we like to see is that there has been a probate of the will or someone's filed a list of heirs or a real estate affidavit. But sometimes there's nothing showing that this person is deceased and the son's selling the property. So we have to clear up that gap, so there's requirements in our binder of, we have to have proof of death of dad and or mom or both, and then they require like a list of heirs or a real estate affidavit showing the chain of title. Those things have to be recorded. But it's nice if all that's done when we get the search
Or
back,
if
but it's,
somebody's put it in a trust and.
yeah.
makes it a whole lot easier.
Mhm. And if it isn't a trust, if your seller has their property in a trust, we do need a copy of the trust. That is something that we do need, or certificate of trust. It can be that. So those are things that we need.
Do y'all have an attorney on staff?
Not like to prepare a deeds or
Well,
like
just
questions
If
or,
you run into issues like related to, inheriting property and heirs and it goes like really sideways, and you need a legal person to handle that, how does that work?
so we do have an attorney, we have a few attorneys that we work with as,
Will you repeat the question?
oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Okay.
I think that thing.
Now you can maybe say that.
So you're asking if we have an attorney on staff or an attorney we work with to help with questions. We have sorry, I'm making sure, is that okay? Okay. We do have, attorneys that we work with that prepare our deeds that we can ask those questions to. We do have an
Underwriting
attorney,
support,
underwriting support with investors has an attorneys
Okay.
that if they have,
provide us guidance as well.
yeah. You're welcome. Like if we have questions on an estate that we need answered, investors has an attorneys that we can ask those questions to, or the underwriter will ask those questions to.
The underwriter will work for you or
The underwriters work with Virginia Title Center.
Okay.
We have 4 or 5, 4, soon to be 5 underwriters. And we have one that's commercial certified. Yeah, they're with us and then we underwrite through investors. All right. So we get the deed prepared by the attorney. So the information sheet that we send you guys up front has information about the inspections. If there's going to be inspections, so we're looking for those invoices when you guys get those. If y'all can make sure you forward them to your processor so we can have those saved down and added to the binder. I mean, to the HUD, I'm sorry, or CD as we get them. So now that hopefully we have clear title and the lender's ready to close and the closing date's coming up, that's when we start our scheduling process. We usually reach out to the buyers or the sellers, see, do they want to close remotely? Do they want to close in our office, your office, the lender's office? Because we have 3 offices, but we obviously we go everywhere. So, we work out those details and we get with the lender. I'll let you. So we get with the lender and where am I? Sorry, I haven't jumped ahead. We work with the lender on the CD. If it's a cash deal, we just send it to you guys to look at the HUD. If it's a CD, if there's a lender involved, we work with finalizing those figures with your lender, with the buyer's lender, go back and forth. After that's finalized, we'll send it to the realtor to review. When we send that, we definitely want you guys to review it, make sure your commission looks right. If there's an earnest money deposit, make sure we have that on there and the correct person holding it, whether it be you or us. Make sure it comes out of the commission if that's the way it is. Make sure you see the inspections that you had sent us that are on there. There's any seller paid closing costs that were in the contract, make sure those are in there as well. So after we get all that finalized and we know our HUD or CD looks good, we send that with our wire instructions to the buyer. So they will wire us the funds. We do require a wire for anything over $500. We do like to when we send those welcome letters out in the beginning,
I'm sorry, you don't take certified funds?
we don't take certified checks. We only take a wire.
Thank you.
You're welcome. For 500. Repeat the question. So when we send out the disclosures at the beginning, the information letters, we do like to tell the buyer up front that we do require a wire, so they will be prepared for that if it's going to be over $500. And we like to let them know that they will only receive the wire instructions from us, that they're not going to come if they got an email from you with wiring instructions that may not be right. That may be a scam email. We have a story to tell you about that, but we try to let them know up front. We like the agents to let them know up front that the wire instructions will come from us. And then when they get them, they still should call us and verify that that was our wire instructions to make sure their money is going to us. So after we get all that set up, we send our documents over to the closer to start the closing process. And this is where Dawn's going to take over. But do you have any questions on anything that I talked about?
Go down that
Make sure
slide.
there's nothing else on that one for you. On the slide.
Uh,
Very good.
I don't know.
Oh, you feel like that?
I have a basic question.
Yes,
What is the underwriter underwriting?
the title. When the title search comes back from the abstractor, okay, so you're asking what the title underwriter underwrites.
Yes,
Right.
ma'am.
Okay, they review, so the search comes back, the full search, 40+ years. They are reviewing the title search to see if there's deeds of trust, if there's judgments, clear title, to make sure there's, if there's any easements. They're the ones that write the title binder that we review to clear the title issues. So they're basically looking at the title search
Ensure that
to,
you can convey. the
yeah,
property.
to ensure that we're to tell us what we need to do to make sure that the clear title gets conveyed to your buyer.
And then where do the investors come in?
I'm sorry, do what?
You mentioned that you have investors.
Investors title insurance is who we
Okay,
underwrite
so
through.
they-
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
One thing I try to tell people that helps understand, like, how you have a State Farm agent. So Virginia Title Center is an agent for investors.
Yeah.
If that,
I got you.
yeah, kind of if you look at it like that.
Yes, ma'am.
Will you explain your procedure when you finalize the balancing CD with the lender? So
Yes,
everybody knows kind of what you're doing during
Yeah,
that time.
yeah, explain the balancing of the CD. So the lender, up front, when we do the prelims, we're basically just sending the lender our fees, the title insurance, and the recording fees, because that's kind of all we know up front. When it comes down to closer to closing and the lender's ready, they send us their CD, which includes all of their fees. And that's when we finalize the day, so we can add in the tax prorations, if there's HOA dues. But we're adding in their fees to our closing disclosure and making sure all of our fees are accurate. And then we send that back to the lender. They may make some corrections. We kind of go back and forth with them a little bit till we match to everything we have is accurate and what they have is accurate. Does that sum that up? Anything else? So when the sellers, we do try to tell the seller up front when they come to closing. Of course, they're not going to get their proceeds at the closing table. We have to record first. We do prefer to wire their proceeds. So we try to tell them up front to bring a voided check or to go ahead and email or, send us a voided check or deposit ticket. So we'll have that information at close, after we close and record, so we can send that to them. And then this is where we send our documents, our final documents for closing to the closer. And now we're on closing day, which Dawn's going to take over.
Alrighty. So Angie talked about everything leading up to closing day. And on closing day, you've got a lot of people working behind the scenes for you because the processor obviously is still involved in the transaction. You've got myself or another closer that's going to be actually meeting with your clients. And sometimes on occasion that could be your processor too, just depending on the situation and the level of work they have and where the closing is. And then there's a team I don't think we've talked about yet of post closers in the office that handle, after I get done, we hand it off to them and they handle the money and everything from there. So there's several different folks working on closing day. But what to bring to closing, because you are, your primary contact for your customers, obviously, more than likely. So we try to prepare them, but just some things that, always we need photo ID, obviously. And that everyone that needs to sign needs to be there. Sometimes you'll have a husband and wife buy a property together, and for whatever reason, only one party is on the loan. But remember, if both are on the deed, they both do need to come to closing. And hopefully the lender has made them aware of that, and we've made them aware of that, but just something to keep in mind. Sometimes people think if they're not on the loan, they don't need to come to closing, but they are going to have to sign some things at closing. And like Angie mentioned, for the seller to be prepared to let us know how they want to receive their proceeds that day. Ensure all parties are present. Surprisingly, that sometimes is a problem where people think, they have an appointment, but they can come in at a different time. And right now, thankfully, things aren't quite as crazy. We can probably work that out, but obviously being on present and on time. And we like to know if you're coming as well. We love it if you can come. If you can't, that's understandable, but we love for the realtors to come. And so I always make a habit of asking the client if I don't know if the realtor's coming, and the client gets there first, if their realtor's coming, and we'll wait for you, to get there, to get started. The closing table. So obviously we'll be in a conference room. Sometimes people expect, like buyers expect the sellers to be there or vice versa. That's just in some areas, apparently that's how they do it, but generally not here. So that might be something you have to prepare your folks for as well. And then, I'm sorry.
How do you do that? The sellers come and then the buyers come later?
Yes, yeah, we prefer, and sometimes sellers even sign a day ahead of time or a few days ahead of time if necessary. So, but we do like the sellers to sign before the buyers if possible. Sometimes it goes opposite, but that's what we prefer, is for us to set up the sellers to sign first, and then the buyers to come in right after is what we try to do. Yeah. And confirming all lender and buyer funds are received. People always want to know that their wires came through because everybody hears about wire fraud. And again, we're gonna hit on that a little more too here shortly. But the post closers that I mentioned, that team is in charge of making sure all the money has come in. So that's something we have to do. We really want the buyers to wire the money before they come to closing, because depending on the bank, it could take a couple hours for us to get the wire, and that could slow things down for everybody. So we really prefer the buyers try to wire the money before they come in. So we're going to look at, should I go through the HUDs now? All right. Well, we're going to look at some HUD, the statements that are in your folders here in a minute, but I'll talk about the rest of what happens after we get done closing. Excuse me. So obviously there's a lot of paperwork to go through, especially if there's a loan involved. But after that is done, either in person or now since COVID happened, a lot of the courthouses, we can do everything online now. And you guys have probably heard about that. So there were some good things that came out of COVID because they've been doing this in Northern Virginia for years where it was electronic with the courthouses, and courthouses around here were dragging their feet. But finally now almost all of them do it electronically, which has sped things up for everyone, because what that means is the post-closing team, once I'm done and hand it off to them, they can update title, double check, because that search Angie talked about would have been done weeks or a month ago, prior to closing. So we've got to make sure nothing else happened against that property up to the moment it gets recorded for your buyer. So someone is going to update title, make sure everything looks good, and then process the recording. If we do it online, usually it comes back pretty quickly, but there still could be a little bit of a lag depending on how many other people are ahead of us and whatnot. But that's what that after the recording process is done, after everything is on record, the processors inform everyone, the realtors, that it's on record. And then that's when we can release funds to the seller. And sellers can come pick up a check if they prefer. That can be done. Or hopefully they'll allow us to wire it, because if they take a large check, their bank's probably going to hold it for 10 days or whatnot. So, and one thing too to mention, Virginia Title Center does not charge wire fees, and they don't charge an overnight fee either if the client needs it sent to them overnight. So you're not going to see additional fees for those. Any questions on anything so far I've talked about? And obviously the other invoices like repairs and whatnot go out then as well. And one thing you can let us know up front, and once your processor starts working with you, they're going to know how you like things. But do you want, us to send your check to the office? Do you want to come by and pick it up? We're willing, if you come to closing, to allow you to take it, and it'll have a letter with it saying you're not going to do anything until we tell you it's on record. So Virginia Title Center is really flexible about how you get paid as well, and we'll work with you on what's best for you. All right, so I moved on to the next one, but did anybody have questions about what I just went over about the closing table? Yes.
Actually, so you're a professional mobile closer. What does the mobile imply?
So I will go do, she's asking about what a mobile closer entails, and I will go to a person's house if necessary. That's not something we want to do, often, but we can say if it's someone who can't get out, like I had someone in the last few months that was morbidly obese. They could not leave their house. I apologize. Allergies and what talking. Or nursing homes. Sometimes you have folks in a nursing home and they're able to sign, they're not using a power of attorney, but they need someone to come to them. I will say, if you ever have us go to someone's house, we do prefer that you meet us as well. I could share some stories about things over the years, but anyway, it's just for everyone's safety and your client too. Your client's probably going to feel better if you're there because they know you, not just me, a stranger knocking on their door. So if you have us go to someone's home, we really prefer that you guys also meet us there. Does that answer your question about mobile closers? Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
You said you prefer the buyers wire the money before closing.
Mm-hmm.
Is that like 4 hours before or the day before?
The day before, if possible. It all depends on how, like Angie was talking about, how they have to go back and forth with the lender.
Mm-hmm.
So now with TRID and the CD, if there's a lender involved, they're getting something from the lender 3 days ahead of time. But those numbers might get tweaked right up to the moment of closing, because, if you've been around a long time, how we sometimes your last minute doing the HUD is how it used to be with the lender. Well, now they have to give at least a very close estimate a few days ahead of time. But as soon as they get finalized with the lender, the processor is going to give the client those wiring instructions. So the sooner they can get it done when they get that information. Yeah, just, like, say, for example, if we've got a 2 o'clock closing and then they haven't wired their funds, they also have to go to the bank, you're pushing it, it's not going to happen until the next day, if they're waiting until after closing. So it just helps everything if they can order the wire before they come in for closing. Sometimes that's not possible. I mean, we understand that, but if possible, that's what would help the transaction. Any other questions? All right, so tips for smooth closing, and this is probably kind of a review of things we've already talked about, like Angie talked about, sending the contract obviously as soon as possible, because they're going to order the title work when they get it, and that's what really gets the ball rolling on everything, because you never know what might come back on that title work that needs to be prepared and fixed. Adequate details, she talked about that, and the circumstances, like so many things, like if it's a divorce situation, power of attorney situations, anything like that are any kind of special circumstances. Addendums and invoices. And one thing I don't think Angie mentioned, and just because I'm at the closing table, and so sometimes I know the things that come up last minute, like propane, for some reason that seems to be one that it's like last minute, or the seller comes to the table and they're like, wait a minute, I have $500 worth of propane in my tank. Remember those things, like, if you can, because obviously we have to redo things if we're not realizing that until somebody's at the table asking for that. So that's just another invoice to keep in mind. Communicate and be responsive. I mean, I know, and that works on both sides of the table, of course, but obviously, if we have a question, we need something, the sooner we can get an answer on that, the better. Consider the closing date. And I just mentioned this we were talking about times, like when you close in the afternoon, especially if you close, like a lot of people, they can't get off work anymore, it seems. I'm sure you run into that. You guys probably work a lot of nights and weekends. But everybody likes to close at the end of the day, which is going to push it to the next day for recording. If that's a Friday, that's pushing it to Monday. So those are just things to consider, because sometimes your sellers don't want the people to get the keys until it gets recorded at the courthouse. So especially if you're involved in a contract like that, where the seller doesn't want the person to have the keys, generally, you want to give them at settlement if everybody's okay with that, meaning when everybody signs the papers. But if you have a seller who is a very stickler about not wanting them to have the keys until it gets recorded, you really have to think about that closing date and time. Especially if you're up against a holiday weekend too, because there's a lot of closings that happen on a holiday weekend because people have a 3-day weekend. So all things to consider, if everybody's closing at 4 o'clock on Friday, it's pushing things to the next business day. Verify wired funds, we've talked about that. Avoid pitfalls. Does anybody have any pitfalls that we haven't talked about? Angie, Patty, anything you can think of that? Let's see, I'm looking here. So we do have that in the handout. Invoices, review the CD. I think we talked about all this. Oh, and well, the several locations too. That's one thing to keep in mind, because so the Roanoke office here is the main office, so to speak. So a lot of things like letterhead and whatnot may have that Roanoke office listed, but they might be closing in Rocky Mount. So, we've had that a few times. So just be sure you and your client know exactly which office that you're closing in.
Also, Dawn, making sure that the expectations for the seller are set about the timing of the seller proceeds.
Yeah, and Angie mentioned that briefly, and the seller is not going to get their money until it gets recorded, because that's one thing we have to deal with as well, is explaining to folks, because most people are very agreeable to that, but you will on occasion have a seller that doesn't understand they're not going to walk away with their money once they sign all the paperwork. And that's just explaining it to them that, again, we have to double check that gap in time on the title to make sure nothing else happened against the property. We have run into things like, for example, years ago, I had one that was an estate and everything was fine on the title work. 3 or 4 weeks later, when we closed it, the funeral home had filed a lien against the property. So it turned out okay. All I had to do was get a payoff from the funeral home. However, that did slow things down. So that does happen.
Ma'am,
Yes.
what do the sellers actually do out with keys?
And someone here can correct me if I'm wrong, but the contract says at settlement, unless you add something different to the contract. So settlement is once everybody has signed everything. So that's the preferred way for the buyers to be able to get the keys at closing once they've signed everything. I know we had a situation, and Patty can add to this, where one of our investors, we handled him as the seller. This was back when sellers and buyers could go to different places. He was our seller. The buyer was already in the house, but the seller didn't have his money. So he was very upset with that. But in checking with an attorney, right, we were advised that unless you write something else, unless the seller puts in the contract, you can't get the keys until it records that settlement is when the papers are signed. Is that's what you were, so the way the contract reads, unless you write anything else, the buyer should be getting their keys at closing. But we do have sellers that want it to record first, and we honor that if we are told to do that. All right. Any other questions so far? All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about, oh, sorry, go ahead.
So what does it look like if someone's selling their home and using the proceeds to buy another home and trying to do it?
Oh, good question. Thank you. So the question was, and this happens quite often, you have sellers who are selling a home and buying another home. If Virginia Title Center is handling both transactions, that makes it lovely because the money is all in one place. But if your seller, say, for example, is coming to us and then they're going to a different agency for their purchase, we'll work with that agency. We'll get their wiring instructions and wire it to them. But keep in mind, then you've got another, level of that could delay it to the next day. If you start early enough in the morning, like you do a buyer seller at 9, and you get that one done, you can probably get the proceeds to the next title company midday or so, hopefully, if everything goes smoothly. But that's something you do have to keep in mind, because then they have to close, and so there is a few hours gap there from moving the money from one transaction to the other. If everybody's closing, like I said, at the same place, that makes it a lot faster because you don't have to do that wire transfer in the middle. But that's what we would do. We would wire all their proceeds to wherever they're purchasing. And then if they don't need all of that money as a down payment, that company would give them whatever the difference is. Does that answer that? Okay. Any other questions before we move to look at the HUD and CD? So in your packet, you've got some examples of different settlement statements. So those of you that have been around a long time, the HUD is what we used to have for everything. And now you'll see it for commercial or sometimes cash. For a cash deal, you're either going to see the HUD settlement statement, the one that looks like this on page 1, or you're going to see a master settlement statement. You're going to see one of those for your cash deals. Okay. First, looking at the HUD, if you look at the way, when I do a closing, I go through page 2 of the HUD first, because that's going through all the fees. And that is where you want to look as well for your commissions, and if there's any pest inspections, those are going to be at the bottom. Everybody finding that one? And then page 1 of the HUD is where you would see if there was, say, an HOA or a propane, anything that the seller had paid ahead of time that they're going to get a credit back for. You would see that on page 1. Do you guys want me to quickly go through you want me to go through the settlement statement, or I don't know how much detail you guys need?
You have that on the screen that you can
Let's
go
see
through
if
it
it
and
is.
Everybody's got it. Example.
It's just an example, yeah.
Can run through.
Okay.
It's helpful.
Yep, excuse me 1 second.
Let's step over here.
So like I said, I start on page 2 of the HUD. And let's just say this one, let's look at this as a seller. So the seller is the outside. And starting at the top is where you'd see the realtor commission. And then this one, you're in, if it's a commercial, you would have some lender fees. This one is a cash deal. And then you're going to come down, the 275 is the Virginia Title Center settlement fee. And then the 45 is the courthouse grand tourist tax. And then the bottom bucket is where you're going to see the deed prep and if there were any inspections. And then on the buyer side of that column, you'll see that the title charges, they have more in title charges because the buyer is who pays for the title examination. They're getting the title insurance. They're paying for the update and record. So that's why there's more fees listed. And then for the courthouse, there's more fees for the buyer as well. And then when you come to page 1 of that, this page is where you would see any prorations as well. This one, they didn't have any in here, but let's say if the taxes had been paid ahead, then you're going to see the buyer giving the seller money towards taxes or the HOA dues or whatever the case may be. In this example, the seller had to give the buyer a tax credit, that $41.19. Yes. Yes.
I have a question about title insurance.
Yes, ma'am.
You work with, you said investors.
Correct.
You have ownership in that? Does Virginia
I'm gonna let
have
Patty or
ownership?
Bobby.
No.
Oh, Bobby stepped up.
Can a buyer shop their own title insurance if they don't like the rate that they're getting, or is that kind of basic across the board, same rates?
The rates do vary a little bit.
Not much.
Not very much.
Not really.
You know, we find that our rates are usually a little bit less than quoted by others.
I've never had anybody ask, but I just kind of come into my head.
We underwrite exclusively through investors title.
Sure.
But it is,
Fair rates.
they're pretty standard across the board. There's 2 different kinds of rates.
We're gonna have to, nobody can hear what you guys are talking about.
So the question was, can the buyer shop around for title insurance? And then Patty is explaining that the rates are generally the same with across the board for title insurance. And we only write with investors title is who Virginia Title Center uses.
Would you think, like, if she wanted to know, just for her general knowledge, maybe when she had a deal, to check with you and check somewhere else, so she knew on that one deal, and then she could kind of give her clients a general guidance instead of, because certainly they don't want to shop every deal, right? Like, that'd be a nightmare.
We might want to save this till afterwards because it's too hard. The people on Zoom can't hear any of this and they're gonna get frustrated. So you might ask this after the class.
or when I get up there, we need to do these questions.
Oh, yeah, we are going to get more into title insurance. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Any other questions on the settlement state, the HUD? All right. And then I think the master settlement should be the next one behind it in your package. And you're probably going to see this one more often on cash deals now, I would say. It depends on really the processor's preference, that we're able to use either one legally, either one is fine. The master settlement kind of just lays it out as debits and credits. And it has the same. It might be a CD next. Sorry if they're not in the exact order.
On legal.
It's on legal. Okay. There we go. So those that are stapled
Yeah.
together are the ones you're going to see
Thank you.
on a cash deal. So just so you know what you would see. But, and the master settlement statement looks real similar to an ALTA, which we'll look at in a minute if you're familiar with that. All right, let's move. So, and going back to, so the CD, prior to the CFPB, that was what was implemented after the big crash in 08, 09. The government created a whole new entity to manage our business, the CFPB. And so they came up with the closing disclosure, thinking that it was easier to understand than the HUD. And I don't know about you, but I still like the HUD. That's okay though. So the closing disclosure is now what your buyers are going to see that has a lender. You're always going to have a CD, and the seller and buyer each sign their own CD. And they don't see each other's CDs. So that is kind of nice that they separated out the information for both.
For the benefit of people on Zoom, so they can see what forms to be looking at, could you go down 2 screens, please?
Oh, yep. There we go. Oh, I went past it. Sorry.
Hit page up.
Page up. There we go. So now I'm talking about the CD. So the CD, the first page of that is going to be like a snapshot of their loan. Okay. The pages that you want to pay attention to, if you happen to get sent this to review, you're going to be looking at, in this case, pages 2, 3, and 4. Sometimes pages 2 and 3 are combined on this as far as all the fees. But this is very similar to the HUD. It breaks out different fees in different boxes. You start off with lender fees, title fees. Then the next on page 3, you've got recording fees, prepaid fees, initial escrow payments, and then the other box. So the other box is where you're going to want to check for commissions if we're looking at a seller one. This one happens to list what the commissions are. You're not always going to see that on the buyers. It may only be on the sellers. And where you would have any inspections would be listed here. Also, if you happen to have a home warranty for your person, it would be in that box as well. And then the next page are your credits, your proration. So this page is where you would see if there were any HOA dues that need to be split out. This is where your propane would show up, any seller credits. You know, be sure if you have a buyer getting seller credits that you see that on that page. Questions on any of that? All right. And then behind the closing disclosure, you're going to see an ALTA for the buyer. And this is going to be the exact same fees that you saw on the other one. And this one is behind. If you go all the way past the CD, the ALTA statement is basically what I explained to the client is that the lender prepared the CD, and then this one is our document for the fees. So this is going to have the exact same numbers, and you may, your processor may send you this to review, which is just an easier way to list. It just lists the fees, all of it. So it's a little easier to look at as far as the totals. And then you should have another CD in your package, which is your seller CD. That's the one at the top. It says Johnny B. Lucky and Shirley B. Lucky. This one is a seller CD. So they're a little shorter because you don't have all the lender information, obviously. So this one, you're going to be looking at page 2 and page 3 to review your fees and or any inspections, commissions, etc. And then we also have an example of the ALTA for the seller to sign because, again, they sign their own. Any questions on the closing disclosures or how we split taxes or anything like that? Anything about the numbers that you guys have questions about that you may run into? No? All right. And I'm gonna either turn it over to Patty or Bobby slipped out on me again. I was gonna try to put him on, I was gonna try to put him in the hot seat. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn and Angie. As you can see, there's a lot that goes into the process after you guys write the contract. We and your closing agent, whoever it might be, is always there to help assist you and your clients through it, so it's not overwhelming. Each one of your clients that you work with will have a different level of understanding of the process, whether they're a first-time home buyer and need a lot of hand-holding, or someone that's purchased a lot of homes or investment properties. Our team is a great resource, and any settlement agency that you work with has folks that are knowledgeable and can answer questions as you go. And when you receive the HUD or CD in advance and you're not sure of what some of the information is listed on it, or you see that there's the commissions are not listed correctly for some reason, or that there's missing invoices, we ask that you reach out to us as soon as possible, so that can be fixed before getting to the closing table. Because once you're at the closing table, you want to kind of be able to sit there and go through and have a pleasant experience for your clients. So let's talk a little bit about title insurance. It's there to protect homeowners and mortgage lenders against future claims on unknown defects in the chain of title. So what exactly does that mean? There are two different types of, oops, I'm going to lose my computer here. There's two types of title insurance. There's lender's title insurance and there's owner's title insurance. The lender requires it, and it's there to make sure that they have first position in the lien should anything happen. It protects them against title defects which originate prior to the date of the policy. So with title insurance, it's one of those things that's from the date of purchase backwards. And it's a one-time fee. The lender's insurance only covers the lender's interest. It does not protect the buyer in any way. So unfortunately, the CFPB has chosen that owner's insurance is considered optional. So that's something that is in a different section of the closing disclosure. And we highly recommend that every buyer obtain an owner's policy, because it protects them from all kinds of things that could creep up after the closing that weren't found prior to it. Liens, judgments, unpaid taxes, situations with easements, access to the property. There's all kinds of things that can come up, and I'm going to share some stories with you that will help you understand and be able to explain it better to your clients as well, why it's important. A lot of times in cash transactions, they'll say, oh, I don't need it. Well, I've got a great example of that where, yeah, you do. Or it's been in my family's property's been in my family forever. I know all about it. Well, maybe you don't. There's cases, and I have one to share you with you on that too. So there are a couple documents in your packets and that we've sent to those by Zoom. One is why you need title insurance and 5 reasons for obtaining it. These are really great documents that we're willing to share with you guys, that if you want to have these to provide to your clients, that really helps them sit down and read and understand the importance of title insurance. The questions that Mary had about the fees, there's 2 different kinds of owner's policies. There's your basic one, and then there's your homeowner's one, which covers additional items. It only qualifies for certain properties. Our feeling is the basic policy covers everything that really needs to be covered. and it's less expensive. It's 30% less expensive than the enhanced product. So that would be the question, Mary, that you would want to ask when you're getting a quote. What type of policy are you quoting me? Because they may be quoting the 30% higher one. Okay, so that's something. Also, just as a point of reference, if you ever want to use it on our website, we have a great quote calculator that you can put in the zip code, which municipality it's in, the sales price and loan amount, and it's going to give you all of the title fees, the settlement fees, and also the government fees, recording fees. And so those are, it's really nice to have that, because that, along with the lender's fees and your commissions, you have a really good picture of what it's going to cost for a client to close. So, yes, ma'am.
So for the owners, the title insurance, which you said was optional.
Yes.
So I always tell my clients to get title insurance, but
Thank
I
you.
don't necessarily have the conversation with them about the different policies. Is
Yes.
that something that you guys are having conversations with them on the side, maybe about that? Because I haven't really advised them in that capacity, so I just want to make sure.
We do cover that in our conversations with them. We encourage them to get the owner's policy. Some will opt out early. We do our best to try to explain to them why it's so important. For a very nominal one-time fee, you've got it covered. The average fee would be the equivalent of an hour or two of attorney fees should an issue arise later to resolve a claim. So it's prudent for them to pay the small amount upfront for something that could cost them thousands and thousands of dollars later if they don't have that policy. So, but we are always happy to have that conversation. We do provide them with the flyers and such too, I think, when we send the welcome letter.
Yeah, it looks like most of us do.
Yeah, so we try to give that to them up front. Yeah. Good. Any other questions specifically about lenders and owners policies? Good. All right. Now I'm going to talk about kind of some nightmare claim stories, because I think it really helps people understand. First one is a missed $250,000 federal tax lien. Some folks first-time home buyer bought a property for $100,000. Later, it was discovered that a $250,000 federal tax lien from the former owner, the seller, was missed during the search. The seller was in jail. He had owned several other properties that lien also attached to. So because they had purchased an owner's policy for about $200, we took care of negotiating to get that $250,000 lien taken off of their, released from their property and attaching just to the remaining properties that individual owned. Now, if they didn't have title insurance, they would have had to do all the work on their own and may not have resulted in such the same result. And they may have been liable for that attaching to their property. Misjudgments against a prior owner. And here's the cash one I love. This guy bought a house for cash. He wanted to use the equity in that home to purchase another home. Well, when we were doing the search on the new property, because he was using the prior property as his collateral, we did a search on that and found that there was a $15,000 judgment that had been missed from the prior owner. He had opted, we had to research because he couldn't remember if he bought title insurance, and the company that he closed with was no longer in business. But we did some investigation, which our processors very often have to be investigators and do a lot of research on things, determined that he did not purchase an owner's policy. So in order for him to be able to get another loan, he had to pay that $15,000 judgment that wasn't his. Which, ouch, probably not a lot of us have that available to us. So we closed on his new home or his investment property, and Do you think he purchased an owner's policy this time? He did not, which to me is like, what? You know, a couple $100 would have saved him that 15,000 before, and he was willing to take that gamble again. So anyway, that's another good one. Prior owner equity line paid but not closed. Family purchased this home. At closing, the seller's mortgage and equity line was paid off. But sometime later, that seller figured out that the bank didn't close that equity line. He went out and did some shopping, ran that equity line up, defaulted on it, and the bank went to foreclose on that property that he no longer owned. Yeah, evil people out there. So the current owner, fortunately, they had purchased an owner's policy. They filed a claim, and because they had that, the equity line was paid off at no cost to them, which made them whole on their property. So again, a few $100s up front can really save a person a lot of money. And here's the one for a good one where, say it's been in the family forever. Family purchased a home from heirs of an estate. A few years later, knock, knock, knock on their door. And they open the door, there's this guy standing there, and he said, I own part of your property. This used to be my dad's house. And they were like, we thought at closing, all the heirs were paid off. So they submitted a claim because they had an owner's policy. And upon research, it was discovered that this guy was from a family that the heirs knew nothing about. So because they had an owner's policy, Walter, shame on you.
All my children have been disclosed.
Because they had an owner's policy, the title company paid off this son what he would have gotten as proceeds, and they were done with it. So again, it's little things like that that you don't know. I know we had one that we were trying to close, and the gentleman was deceased, and his heirs were signing, and we were trying to make sure we had the complete list of heirs. And the one sibling said, well, yeah, my brother was quite the player. We could not continue the closing because we didn't know if we had the complete list of heirs. So that was another interesting story. So sometimes things should not be said. But does definitely reinforces the importance of an owner's title policy. It is something that folks don't normally understand because it's not like a life insurance policy or car insurance policy that's insuring you forward. It is something that insures you backwards on things that may have happened before you owned the property. Cool. Any questions about title insurance? Yes, ma'am.
Is it too late to get title insurance after buyers have bought a house?
The question was, can you basically buy an owner's policy if you declined it at closing? You can go back and purchase it. Certainly you would not, if you feel that you have a claim, that's not the time to purchase it because it's too late at that point. But yes, you can go back and purchase it after the fact. You don't get the same discounts of the simultaneous issue that you would have had you bought it at closing.
Is there still a credit available if the prior seller has title insurance?
Yes, the question is if the seller had title insurance on the property, can you get a prior credit? Yes. If it's within the last 10 years that policy's been issued, there is a prior policy, and it's a 30% discount. Yeah, so it's significant. And so that is a good question to ask. If we can get a copy of a prior policy, and it does not have to be written on investor's title paper. It can be by any other company as long as it's within the last 10 years. So good question, Mary. All right. Let's see. Let's talk a little bit about wire fraud. We're hearing a lot more about fraud, period, lately. A lot of real estate fraud, which if we have a few minutes, I might share some stories on that as well, because it's becoming more prevalent. So wire fraud. Wires are safer than any other means, and that's why we require a wire. But there's some certain things that you need to know. There's some really tricky, mean people out there that make it their life mission to steal money from others. And they will tap in to communication between realtor and purchaser and title agent, and they will sit there and they will watch your communications. And they will go in and they can spoof the realtor, they can spoof the title agency's email address and start communicating directly with the buyer and give them false information. We have seen that happen. We had an instance, Dawn was doing the closing. And the closing had gotten delayed. It was supposed to be done several days later. It got pushed out for reasons I can't remember. But we had the folks at the closing table and got down to the point where Dawn was talking about the money that needed to be wired. And he was like, well, I actually wired it several days ago. And I wired more, so I should be getting some money back. And Dawn went to check to verify that, and we had never received the wire. What had happened was that the fraudster had spoofed the realtor's AOL account and sent a message and said, even though we're delayed with the closing, go ahead and wire your wire, and here are the wiring instructions again. So, thinking it was from his realtor, went to the bank. They did not call to verify the wire instructions, which is, as you can see in the bottom of this slide, always call to verify the wire instructions. That money was sent to an account at Wells Fargo. We bank at American National, and those funds went in and they went out. So by the time he got 3 days later to the closing table, those funds were long gone. And it was, when we figured out what happened, we had him show us the wire instructions he used. And I just looked at him and I said, those are not ours. Your money's gone. It was, it was awful. It was awful. This guy was buying a house for his family at the lake, and his dad was going to be moving into that house. He was moving into the area. Fortunately, he was a man of means and was able to get on the phone with his lender, move some money around in his accounts, and had the necessary funds to close wire to us again. But it was,
But most people, that's not gonna.
yeah, most people
We're
that wouldn't
talking
happen.
A lot of money.
Yeah. And first-time home buyers are prey. Fraudsters look for those type because they know they don't understand. They don't know. So it's so important. Number one, wire instructions will only come from your settlement agent. They should never be sent by a realtor. And always call a phone number that's a known phone number to verify the wire instructions. Now, the wire instructions, the fraudulent wire instructions, had our company name on there. They had looked like our wire instructions. They had just replaced the information of the account and didn't have please call to verify. So, you know, it's just, we've been fortunate. That's the only time that it's really occurred to us. I know it's happened to several other settlement agencies locally recently. And it can be very costly. Now, we don't know if this man ever recovered his money. We gave him the information because he had to get the FBI and everybody involved. They say the likelihood of it being recovered is slim because that money is probably out of the country just like that. Folks are smart. So, so it is important. Know who you're working with. Help your clients, set the expectations with them of what they should be receiving and what they need to know as far as that process. We do take a lot of EMDs by wire. We always ask, even that's a smaller amount, call to verify the wire instructions. We get lots of calls every day, and I thank everyone when I take the call to verify it. Thank you for calling to verify the wire, because it's just, this is people's money, and most people can't afford to lose. So scammers play on fear. Their messages are, you need to do this now. The transaction is going to fall apart if you don't wire your funds right now. They play on fear. So if your buyers understand the process enough to know when their funds need to be wired and who they should be getting communication from, that's very important. We have just a couple seconds. If you guys are okay, I was going to talk a little bit, and y'all probably been hearing about it too. Real estate fraud. We're getting notices weekly from Investors Title notifying us of more and more of this happening. We had one that we were in the middle of one, and we had gotten a fraud alert and had a checklist, and our settlement processor went down the checklist and checked everything that could possibly be red flags. So she called me and she says, I think I've got one. And it's when somebody is buying a piece of land or a piece of property that isn't actively, like an old gas station, or there's different things, large parcels of land. And the people that are involved in it are not local, and very often don't have a real estate agent involved. Now, sometimes they will involve with a realtor in some form or fashion. And they say they will close their own and have their own notary to close it. Just be cautious if someone reaches out to you and wants to list property, that you do your due diligence to make sure that they are who they say they are, that they actually own the property, because that's public information who owns a piece of property, and they can pretend to be anybody they want to be. There was one this morning that their new alert came out that folks are faking death certificates and using that to sell a piece of property, saying that, they were the heir to this property of this deceased person. They have the death certificate and so on and so forth. The fraudsters are just getting more creative all the time, and it's really sad. So everybody really needs to be on their P's and Q's to make sure that all parties are involved. Now, when you guys do listings, do you do any preliminary research looking up data? Because that's something that we encourage, and we really like it when we know that there's been that research done to make sure that, yes, your person does own the property.
What type of research do you suggest?
And Mary, you can maybe share, because you said, or Walter, looking up the land records, looking up the tax records.
Yeah, I typically go through CRS tax to check and see who are the listed owners, as well as all of the region's GIS websites as well. I did have one several years ago where it ended up, the guy called me to come list the house, and I pulled up the CRS tax records, and it was not the same person. And one of the first questions I asked him when I got there was, who is this? And it turned out that it was a domestic partnership that had gone sideways, and the actual owner of the home went to work one day and never came back. ended up contacting their partner months later and telling them that they had moved to North Carolina and they could do with the house as they wanted. Per legal advice, we went ahead and got a power of attorney to that effect.
Yeah,
So,
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, definitely always do as much due diligence as you can.
mhm.
Do you suggest that you take a potential listing? Do you take the owner's driver's license information, or how can you be sure who you're talking to is actually the owner? I mean, if they say they're the owner, and if they say I'm John Smith and it shows on this tax data that John Smith owns the house, how do you know that's really John Smith? Am I responsible for verifying his identity?
That's a good question.
I've
What-
never asked anyone for their driver's license.
No, I don't.
We asked for it at closing.
Okay,
Yeah, at closing, we have to take the driver's license or valid ID of buyers and sellers.
I mean, typically in a listing scenario, I guess very rarely you are meeting them somewhere other than at their
Actual
home.
Yeah,
yeah.
So usually when you show up at the house and they're occupying the home, that's pretty much.
yeah, land might be different. Mhm. And I think you had a question?
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
If somebody owns a property in an LLC or something like that, where it may not be as easy to verify, at least for us, what is y'all's process with, do you just get I mean, you have to register your LLC, it has to be a certain person, like, what is your process for verifying that?
Yeah, we have to get the
We go to the SCC website.
SCC
and
website.
get, like, make sure they're active and good
Mhm.
standing. Have to get the operating agreement or,
Yeah,
their corporate
so,
documents.
yeah, the
who's
question was, if it's an LLC, how do we make sure? Well, we look at the SEC website to make sure they're valid and up to date. We ask for their organization.
It's their corporate docs, their LLC docs,
Yeah.
depends on what it is.
The actual corporate docs to show, and also that the person signing is authorized to sign.
Okay.
And their docs, their LLC docs normally say who is authorized to sign on behalf of the LLC. Yeah.
Most people in that situation will be able to produce those documents on demand.
Yes.
too. That should not be a complicated process for anyone. I actually had a client years ago who was selling off a bunch of rental properties. He had them saved on his phone,
Mhm.
so it's not a complicated thing.
Right. And Mary, did you have something you wanted to add? Good, okay. Cool. Other questions about the settlement process, about title insurance? Do a plug for ourselves, I think at the back of your folders there, I threw in a little bit of information about our team and our fees. We have what we call the VTC Dream Team because they're pretty darn amazing. And, our goal is to provide an exceptional client experience for everyone in the transaction. We take pride in our communication, our responsiveness and accessibility.
Laura has something she would like to say. You could call on her.
Laura, where are you?
I'm on Zoom.
Woohoo!
I wanted to chime in on the real estate scam. VAR has sent the word out. RVAR has sent the word out about imposter sellers. There was one recently here. It was a lake property, and the lake is a perfect target because many owners are out of state. Part of the scam is that the fake seller, of course, uses the real name of the seller. I'm out of the country. In this particular case, I'm going through chemo, so I can't meet you in person. Part of the scam is they will send a purposely fuzzy driver's license. So it becomes more difficult because you think it's legit. The one at the lake, fortunately, and of course, they're looking for a quick close.
Mhm.
The one at the lake, and it was like a 400,000 waterfront lot. It was wonderful. It unraveled before a contract got ratified. And ultimately, the real owner in Connecticut was called, and they were able to quickly verify. But it becomes harder and harder when everything they give you is fake. The real estate world is used to checking out bogus buyers. We're not used to checking out imposter sellers. But this scam is going on across the state. And I know Patty and I have communicated about it recently. So just be more careful than usual.
Yeah, they're cash deals and very often the sales price is less than the assessed value, which is one of the big red flags. Mary?
Different, same scam scenario, home inspectors are now getting scammed. Curtis Burchett has a house listed over on Ludwig. My
Mhm.
husband was contacted to go do a pre-listing inspection. And the scammer, sent him certified funds by US mail. But it was for more than the inspection. He said, oh yeah, I thought you could just pay the plumber and the whoever else. Would you just wire these funds to their Zelle account? And, I'm a little more suspicious than my husband, and I was like, no. But, and so he caught on but that's another, we contacted Curtis to let him know that someone is using this property to perpetuate a scam and to make money. And, so that's another layer to what we're seeing.
Right.
And it's happening all over. He went on to a forum. It's happening all over the country. They're now going after home inspectors and vacant listed houses.
Right.
Mhm.
Exactly. So. Cool. Any final questions? Thank you all for being here, for your attention, and eagerness to learn. I applaud you. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to us at any time. Thank you.
Thank you for the goodies.
Yes.